The Great Stand of American Labor, the Flint Sit-Down Strike. The Flint Sit-Down Strike, its effect on the automobile industry and organized labor to take a stand in history. On December 30th, 1936, the workers at the General Motors Fisher Auto Body Plant in Flint, Michigan went on strike. Taking a stand against their employers, the workers participating in the Flint Sit-Down Strike drew strength and protection from the New Deal's Wagner Act to force a seismic shift in labor management relations. The Flint Sit-Down Strike was the catalyst of change that transformed the United Auto Workers from a group of local organizations to its formation as a major national union. It established essential unions for the American industry and created a legacy of collective bargaining that has been emulated by unions around the world.
Approaching the strike before the fight against General Motors. In July of 1935, the National Labor Relations Act, also known as the Wagner Act, was passed by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The purpose of this federal law was to give workers the right to create or join a labor organization to bargain collectively with their employer through representatives of their own choice. Many auto workers used this opportunity to join the newly formed United Auto Workers, commonly referred to as the UAW, which was established in Detroit, Michigan, 1935.
The Flint sit-down strike emerged out of the conditions of the Great Depression, which meant that lots of workers lost their jobs altogether. Those that still had jobs were being made to work longer and longer hours for lower and lower pay. And so there was a lot of fear and anger and frustration on the part of workers.
The Battle of the Union, interior perspective of the strike. On December 30th, 1936, workers at the Fisher Auto Body Plant in Flint, Michigan went on strike to fight against General Motors. The workers took over the plant and refused to leave. People in cars surrounded the plant to create a barrier from allowing the police to enter the building. On January 11th, 1937, the Flint police tried to enter but were blocked by workers who were throwing car parts at them out of the windows. The police used tear gas and guns against them, injuring 14 people. Because women couldn't work in the plant, they helped by delivering food during the strike. They also broke windows for relief from the tear gas. The strike was supported by thousands of unionists around the country, and many historians consider this strike one of the most significant events in the history of labor movement.
I think that the Flint sit-down strike was a big breakthrough in the auto industry. And so the core industries in the United States were all related to auto. Back in the 1930s, the number one employer in the United States was General Motors, and the auto industry was the most important industry. So everyone was interested because it was the most important industry.
Sit-down strikes were gaining popularity in the 1930s. This is one strike that took place in a timber cutting plant in Minnesota. Timber workers were tired of their long days and low wages, so decided to go on strike. The first timber strike began on January 4th, 1937, and ended amicably, giving workers 8 hours a day, $70 per month, better working conditions, and recognized the union. Immediate impact post-strike events. The Flint sit-down strike was the first major victory for unionization in the U.S. In just 2 weeks following the strike, 87 sit-down strikes started in Detroit alone. But most significantly, on February 11, 1937, General Motors agreed to recognize the UAW as their sole bargaining agent. Overnight, this made the UAW go from a fragmented group of local unions to a significant union. As a result of the strike, employees earned the right to speak at lunch, increased hourly pay by 5 cents, and ended discrimination.
One of the really interesting and important things that happened in Flint was a women's auxiliary was organized as soon as the workers went on strike. Because if you think about the situation, if a bunch of workers are going to sit down and stay in the factory, how are they going to eat? What are they going to have for meals? What are all of the things that their families need to be doing that they're not there to participate in because they're in the factory? And the strike went on for weeks. And so the women organized in order to provide food to the men, And the women also organized in a very dramatic way to try to create a buffer in between the police department in Flint and the plant. And so when the police thought about going into the plant to try to drag the workers out, the women surrounded the plant and said to the police, "Are you going to beat up a woman?" You know, and they found a great deal of power in doing that. And so people really, both men and women, workers and their families, became aware that they were making history, that they were doing something really significant, that many people live a lifetime and never have that experience. And part of that is being part of a group that is doing that together.
Lasting impact, the continued legacy. And the lesson that these brave workers teach us is that by organizing, we will have power, no matter who the president is. These workers scared the president, scared the Supreme Court into approving the National Labor Relations Act, scared the U.S. Steel into recognizing the Steelworkers Union, and set an example for all of us to follow. Greg Boswell.
And so these unions really built a foundation in American society that lasted for 3 generations. But now in the second decade of the 21st century, we see the unions being cut down. We see many of these factories closing, being moved to Mexico or China or other places. And so that kind of economic stability and security that generations of blue-collar Americans had come to count on, that now that's disappearing today. And I think studying it today gives us a yardstick to look at what people's lives are like today and to measure what's needed today. What are the challenges that we face in the present and in the future?
The Flint sit-down strike showed the world that workers collectively organizing can have bargaining power with their employer to fight for fair pay and safe working conditions.